We're going to look at a quick review of solving quadratic equations by completing the square. And so I just want to remind you that you have some notes in your notebook that show the steps. So I would strongly suggest, especially if you forgot, to go back and look at that and use those to help you work through that. Remember, we can use completing the square just about any time. So, okay, so the first problem, let's see, what am I doing first? Okay, we've got x squared minus 10x equals negative 21. Let me zoom out. Okay. If you think you remember how to do it, stop the video and see if you can do this yourself. So remember, our first step is to move the c to the right. Well, our c is already moved, so we don't have to worry about that. Then we have to divide everything by a. A is 1, don't have to worry about it. So now, remember, we're going to take half of b, which would be 5, and we're going to square it, which would be 25. And so we are going to add 25 to both sides of our equation. Okay, so this is what our equation looks like now. Now we need to factor this trinomial. Remember, the whole point was to make this a perfect square trinomial. So remember, it's going to be x minus, because that's a minus sign. The square root of 25 is 5, so x minus 5 squared equals 4. And so now we're ready to solve it by using the square root method. So our next step would be then to take plus or minus the square root. X minus 5 equals positive or negative 2. I went ahead and square rooted it because 4 is a perfect square. And then we add 5 to both sides. So x equals 5 plus 2. X equals 5 minus 2. So x equals 7 and 3. Okay, so that was a pretty basic, simple one. Okay, let's look at one a little bit different. Okay, so this one, we've got 2x squared plus 40x plus 32 equals 0. Okay, so our first step, we've got to move the c value to the right. 32 is my c value, so let's move it to the right. I'm going to move it by subtracting. 2x squared plus 40x equals negative 32. Okay. The next thing is that we can't have a perfect square trinomial if I've got something that isn't a perfect square as my a value. So remember, our next step is to divide everything by that a value. So now I have x squared plus 20x equals negative 16. Some of you would make the mistake of trying to complete the square first, but you can't complete the square until that a value is 1. So this is really important that we divide by a. Okay, now we can complete our square. We're going to take half of b, which is 10, right? And we're going to square it, which is 100. Wow. So we're going to add 100 to both sides. Okay, so this gives me x squared plus 20x plus 100 equals, what, 84? I'm going to double check that my math so that I don't do this wrong. Yep, equals 84. Okay. Now we're ready to factor this, our perfect square trinomial. Notice this time we have plus right here. So this is going to be x plus 10, because the square root of 100 is 10, squared equals 84. Now we're ready to use the square root method. So we're going to do plus or minus the square root. x plus 10 equals positive or negative the square root of 84. Notice this wasn't a perfect square, so I did not go ahead and take the square root of it yet. Our next step would be to subtract 10. And so now I'm going to pick up my calculator, and I'm going to do negative 10 plus the square root of 84 and negative 10 minus the square root of 84. Okay? And so just to verify, I have the answers written down, but I want to make sure that I am calculating and doing this correctly. So you should get x equals negative 0.83. And let's see, negative 10, negative 10 minus the square root of 84 is negative 19.17. Ooh, I hope that's right, because that's not what I have written down. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I was looking at the wrong problem. Okay. Any questions? I hope not. I hope that helps and refreshes your memory. Oh, I lied. We got one more. See, this threw me off. These are a little bit harder. Okay, here's one more. 2x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, so let's work through our steps together. Feel free to pause the video and try to do it yourself. We're going to move the c value over. Okay, I'm going to divide everything by 2. X squared minus 3x equals negative 2.5. This one's a little bit tougher, so we're going to have to do half of 3, 1.5. And then we're going to do 1.5 squared, which is 2.25. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and factor this. So it's going to be x minus 1.5 squared equals negative 0.25. Now, is anyone thinking there might be a problem with this? Our next step would be to do plus or minus the square root. Is that going to be possible? I hope you're saying no, because right here, our radicand part, our part underneath the radical, is negative. We can't take the square root of a negative number. If you're not getting an error message, you're doing something wrong. You're not taking the square root of a negative. So since we can't do that, our answer would be no solution. And remember, if you saw this on a graph, this graph opens up. So that would mean that our graph is above the x-axis. The vertex is above the x-axis, and there are no roots or x-intercepts or solutions. So I wanted you to see one like that. That was no solution.